In the 1980s, one man decided he was going to conquer professional wrestling. His name was Vince McMahon, and his vision was absolute. He didn't just want a piece of the pie, he wanted the whole damn bakery. Promoter after promoter, men who had run their family businesses for generations, saw the writing on the wall. They cashed in their history for a payday as McMahon's World Wrestling Federation expanded across the country. But way out in the misty Pacific Northwest, one man said no. This is the story of Don Owen, the last old-school promoter who refused to bend the knee, and the final defiant stand of a bygone era. Before the glitz of WrestleMania, before the Titan Sports monolith, the world of professional wrestling was a patchwork kingdom. It was a network of fiefdoms, dozens of regional promotions bound by a gentleman's agreement under the banner of the National Wrestling Alliance, NWA. From Florida to Texas, from the Carolinas to the Midwest, each territory had its own champion, its own flavor, and its own king. These promoters weren't just corporate suits, they were showmen, part of the fabric of their towns. And in Portland, Oregon, the king was Don Owen. Owen wasn't like the other promoters. He wasn't some flamboyant character or a fast-talking self-promoter. He was a quiet, respected businessman, born right into the industry. His father, Herb Owen, started promoting boxing and wrestling way back in 1925. Don and his brother grew up in the business, selling popcorn and sometimes even lacing up the boots themselves. When his father passed on, Don took the reins of what would become Pacific Northwest Wrestling, or PNW. He was an architect of the old ways. As one of the original promoters who formed the National Wrestling Alliance in 1948, he helped build the very system that defined wrestling for nearly 40 years. His television show, Portland Wrestling, first hit the airwaves in 1953 and ran for nearly 4 decades, becoming one of the longest-running wrestling programs in American history. He even bought a bowling alley and transformed it into the iconic Portland Sports Arena, a sweat-soaked cathedral where legends were born. Guys who had become household names got their start or cut their teeth in the PNW. Jesse the Body Ventura, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and Buddy Rose all came through Owen's territory. They worked a tough, believable style for a loyal, blue-collar audience that showed up every single week. Don Owen was known as one of the most honest and beloved promoters of his time. He paid well, he was a man of his word, and he ran his territory not like a corporation, but like a family. While Don Owen was upholding tradition in Portland, a different kind of ambition was brewing back east. Vincent Kennedy McMahon, son of the respected promoter Vincent J. McMahon, bought his father's company, the World Wrestling Federation, in 1982. Vince Sr. had been a pillar of the NWA territory system, respecting the boundaries and unspoken rules. His son? He saw things differently. He didn't just see a regional promotion, he saw a global media empire. He didn't see wrestling as a sport, he saw it as sports entertainment. The younger McMahon had a vision that his father reportedly found dangerous. The WWF had already operated with some independence for years, but in 1983, McMahon made it official, formally leaving the NWA and declaring war on the very system his father helped build. Armed with the charisma of Hulk Hogan and a game-changing partnership with MTV, McMahon began a national expansion that was as brilliant as it was brutal. The old gentleman's agreement was shattered. McMahon started running shows in rival territories, buying up television slots across the country, and using his deep pockets to poach the top stars from every promotion he targeted. One by one, the old kingdoms began to fall. Some promoters tried to fight back, but their alliances crumbled. Others saw the writing on the wall and just took McMahon's check. Promotions like the AWA in Minnesota, World Class in Texas, and Mid-South didn't get bought out by the WWF. They were systematically dismantled or driven to collapse by the relentless competition and talent raids. The map of professional wrestling was being redrawn, and there was only one artist holding the pen. As the 1980s roared on, the WWF machine set its sights on the Pacific Northwest. Vince McMahon's talent raids, which had crippled so many other territories, hit Don Owen's roster hard. Stars that Owen had built, like Roddy Piper, Billy Jack Haynes, and Buddy Rose, were lured away by the promise of national fame and bigger paydays with the WWF. The lifeblood of the territories was its talent, and McMahon was draining it dry. McMahon didn't just steal talent. He moved his show right into Owen's backyard. The WWF started running events in Portland and Seattle, the heart of PNW country. They brought their larger-than-life spectacle, their rock and wrestling connection, and their roster of national superstars. For the first time, Don Owen faced a competitor with seemingly bottomless resources. But here's the thing about Portland. The fans were different. They had a deep-seated loyalty to their promotion. They grew up on Portland wrestling. They saw Don Owen not as some distant corporate figure, but as one of their own. While the WWF could fill an arena for a one-off super show, they couldn't replicate the week-in, week-out connection Owen had forged over decades. PNW had an intimate mom-and-pop feel that the WWF's polished corporate product could never touch. Owen weathered the storm. He held on, relying on his reputation and his knack for creating new stars. Even as attendance began to decline with the rise of national cable programming, he kept a fiercely loyal audience coming back. While other promoters were folding, Don Owen was still standing, a lighthouse in a hurricane, refusing to be extinguished. At some point during his conquest, as the story goes, Vince McMahon made the call to Portland. The exact details have become the stuff of wrestling legend, but the core of the tale is a powerful one. McMahon, just as he had with so many others, made an offer to buy out Don Owen, to absorb Pacific Northwest Wrestling into his ever-expanding empire. It was an offer to trade a legacy for a comfortable retirement. Don Owen said no. To understand that refusal is to understand the man. For Owen, this wasn't just a business, it was his family's legacy. It was the company his father had started in 1925. It was the promotion he had helped steer as part of the NWA from its earliest days. It was his community, his home, and his life's work. Selling out to Vince McMahon would have felt like a betrayal. He was a man of principle from a different era, where your word and a handshake still meant something. This quiet act of defiance is a world away from the culture McMahon was building. Years later, wrestlers would admit they never knew saying no was an option when Vince gave an order. It was a culture where the boss's word was law. But Don Owen wasn't on Vince's payroll. He wasn't part of the new system. He was a king in his own castle, and he simply refused to hand over the keys. His no wasn't an act of aggression or a declaration of war. It was just a statement of fact. Pacific Northwest Wrestling was not for sale. It was a firm, quiet refusal that was, in its own way, one of the most powerful acts of resistance in the entire territory war. He wasn't trying to beat Vince McMahon. He was just choosing to keep being Don Owen. Don Owen's victory was one of principle, not of power. He never sold out to Vince McMahon, but he couldn't stop the world from changing around him. By the early 1990s, the territory system was dead. Cable television had created a national audience that only the WWF and WCW could consistently serve. The talent pool had dried up, and the business model that sustained regional wrestling for half a century was no longer viable. The end for Pacific Northwest Wrestling came not with a bang, but with a slow fade. In late 1991, KPTV, the longtime home of Portland wrestling, stopped airing the show and replaced it with syndicated WWF programming, a financial decision that spelled the end of an era. A few months later, in 1992, after more than 60 years in the business, Don Owen retired. He sold what was left of his company not to a rival, but to his longtime referee, Sandy Barr. He didn't lose to Vince McMahon. In a way, he outlasted the war itself. He held his ground until the very ground disappeared from under him. He stood as one of the last great holdouts of the old ways, a promoter who finished on his own terms, his integrity intact. He never bent the knee. He simply saw his story through to its natural end. The story of Don Owen is a vital chapter in wrestling history, a reminder of the world that existed before the global empire. If you appreciate these deep dives into the sport's past, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories you won't find anywhere else. Don Owen passed away in 2002 at the age of 90. He is remembered not as a casualty of the wrestling wars, but as a symbol of defiance. He was the last of the original NWA promoters, a man who valued his legacy more than a buyout. The respect he commanded was immeasurable. Roddy Piper, a superstar he helped create, even returned to Portland in 1995 just to present Owen with a Lifetime Achievement Award. In an industry built on scripted bravado, Don Owen's quiet refusal to sell was one of the most real and powerful statements ever made. He was the man who looked the future in the eye, saw the tidal wave of change coming, and simply said, no. He was the last king of a lost kingdom, the final chapter of a bygone era, and the last man who said no to Vince McMahon.